Hello everyone, and warmly welcome to today's seminar with the title Repertoires of Public Giving, Elite Philanthropy in Gift-Theoretical and Comparative Perspective. And this seminar is to be given by Ilana Silber, whom we welcome warmly to SCAS. Ilana is Associate Professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Bar-Ilan University, and she obtained her Ph.D. in Sociology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and has also been a visiting fellow at Harvard University, Princeton University, and Yale University. Since 2014, she's a faculty fellow of the Yale Center for Cultural Sociology, and since 1998, also a member of the M.A.U.S. movement, the Mouvement Anti-Utilitariste dans les sciences sociales. Her main fields of interest are in the sociology of gift processes, charity, and philanthropy, to which she also adds a cross-cutting interest in sociological theory, interpretative cultural analysis, and macro-comparative historical sociology. Moreover, Ilana is generally engaged in furthering dialogue between various branches of the human sciences, including history, cultural studies, religion, perhaps religion in particular, as well as between alternative branches of sociological theory and gift theory. She has conducted empirical research, among other things, on elite philanthropy in Israel. She has written on the history of the non-profit sector in Israel, and she has also supervised several Ph.D. dissertations on various facets of the philanthropic sector in Israel. Ilana Silber's publications reflect these interests and often, I should say, explore the interface of gift theory, theories of justification, and theories of social practice. She thus ventures successfully to bring into play some of the grand social theorists, including M.A.U.S., Weber, Bourdieu, and Boltanski. To me, some of her most interesting publications are an article in Current Sociology from 2012 called The Angry Gift, a Neglected Facet of Philanthropy, and also the article in Sociological Theory from 2009, Bourdieu's Gift to Gift Theory, an Unacknowledged Trajectory. Again, we are very happy to welcome Ilana Silber here. So please, Ilana, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this precise introduction, really, and I'm glad that you took time to look at some of the articles too. I feel a bit awkward looking like a TED lecturer while I was not allowed to walk. Usually TED lectures are walkings, but I guess I will find my way. So thank you to Björn, thank you to Christina and everyone here at SCAS for the warm invitation and welcome. I see it as a treat to spend some time in a site committed to the search for knowledge and the dialogue between scholars and disciplines, and encouraging it all, past and present and future, even I understood, to encounter and flourish. This is really what SCAS is about, as I see it. Closer to the topic of my talk, philanthropic giving, I also wish to recall that SCAS is also, at least in part, not only an intellectual, but also institutional and philanthropic achievement. I do not know how and to what extent precisely, but it is clear that some support of philanthropic foundations, perhaps even specific individual donors, has a part in helping produce the dream setting in which we are meeting right now. My talk today will discuss philanthropy as a form of public giving, giving as it is expressed, oriented to, and affects the public sphere. Charity and philanthropy are the first prototypes that come to my mind, also those on which I have worked myself the most, with a special interest in the dynamics of elite philanthropy, or as it is also often called now, mega high net worth or billionaire philanthropy. But it can include a whole gamut of other examples, including blood donations, as first suggested by Richard Titmuss near to 50 years ago already, in 1970, more even, many forms of unpaid voluntary work, humanitarian aid, the gift of knowledge, science, the arts, the sharing of expertise of all sorts on the internet, down to more minute gestures of goodwill or diplomacy in various contexts, as long as, again, they are expressed in and oriented to the public sphere. More specifically here, I wish to discuss the current state of elite philanthropy as traversed by contradictory trends in terms of its status and legitimacy in society at large, undergoing impressive expansion on the one hand, but also facing a mounting wall of criticism and public distrust on the other. I shall start by first positioning public giving in relation to a rich stream of gift research and theory in which it has remained relatively without attention, left without attention. Then move on to develop the idea of repertoires of public giving and explain how it may be put to use to better understand and compare past and present configurations of public giving, including the rise and predicaments of billionaire mega-giving philanthropy in our own days. This is the plan, at least. I don't want to frighten you, but that's the structure, and I'm not sure I will manage it. This is the plan, at least, and I am aware that it may be too much for one seminar. But since this is very much what is on my mind right now, and since I need to figure out the extent to which I may wish to tie it all together, and in what proportions precisely, in the eventual prospect of a book I have in process, I nevertheless gave in to the temptation to try and share with you some of what is involved, even if still sketchy and tentative, very much work in progress, still full of holes and loopholes, empirically and otherwise. There is definitely an element of risk-taking here, since there are quite a few scholars in this room who know more than I ever will concerning the ins and outs of contemporary financial capitalism, with which the current rise of mega-donors is obviously very tightly associated. So let me try to talk now to put public giving in gift-theoretical perspective. Public giving is only one specific type or expression of giving, if one that is important and yet still relatively under-conceptualized, which means that whatever I succeed to say about it is not meant to apply to all giving, nor the gift in general. Instead, it is part of an attempt I have been conducting now for some years to promote the idea of a non-unitary gift theory, a theoretical approach that would not only allow for much flexibility and diversity of types, modes, or expressions of giving, but actually ask to make diversity a focus of interest as such, something we need better conceptualize rather than obfuscate or just see as an unpleasant problem to overcome. To me, to put it in a nutshell, the gift's diversity is the occasion to operate a fruitful encounter between two classic giants, Marcel Mauss, who authored a path-breaking essay on the gift, Essai sur le don, in 1924, and Max Weber, still best known for his work on the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism of 1905, but also founding father of comparative historical and interpretative sociology and the comparative study of religions and civilizations, with all its due attention to both similarities and diversity. This is for those who are not trained in classical sociology. I know that some of us here are, but not everyone is. So you have the picture of Max Weber, Marcel Mauss, you have Emil Durkheim, who is in between, who actually was the uncle of Marcel Mauss, for who doesn't know. And there is a very famous issue in classical sociological theory, which is called the famous silence between Weber and Durkheim. How come they never talked about each other? There are some articles about it, but in any case, you see more or less the dates, you see more or less the figures that I am talking about. And of course, indeed, Weber never mentioned Mauss, and Mauss never mentioned Weber either. Okay, which is not exactly the same about Simmel. I don't have the time now to enter into issues into issues of real classical, genealogies. If I still see Marcel Mauss as a vital fount of inspiration in this regard, it is due in no small part to its path-breaking emphasis on the gift, as both the vector of a rather simple sequence of three obligations, the famed giving, receiving, returning, the obligation to give, receive, return on the one hand, and a highly complex, contradictory and paradoxical total phenomenon, as he called it, challenging all simplification and reduction on the other. But I also share with many other scholars the feeling that Mauss was more interested in uncovering the gift's recurrent, similar core features and principles of operation across diverse historical periods and civilizations, and much less driven to map out any eventual differences. Since Mauss, simplifying greatly, we may distinguish between three different directions of inquiry, all of which have some basis in his text. One tending to focus on the gift as gift exchange and subsume it under more general notions of exchange, symbolic or else, and reciprocity, Zimmel, Lévi-Strauss, Goulner, for example. The second, challenging Mauss for what they see as his failure to deal with non-reciprocal forms of giving, where there is no obligation to return, as in religious ideals of pure giving in particular. The big name that goes in that direction is Jonathan Perry, who is an anthropologist, as a matter of fact. Third, an anthropologist of India. The third, the attempt to illuminate the gift as a balancing, integrative mechanism of friendship, peace, and solidarity, or focusing on the contrary, on its darker, threatening facets, be it the dangers of what Mauss called agonistic, competitive giving, or the element of deception and collective lie, gifts claiming to be free and disinterested, for example, while in fact shot through with obligation and interest, as was his line of critique famously intimated in the very opening pages of the essay. Mauss's writing, however, on this last point, as many others, was not free of internal contradictions. Not only did he fail to repeat that critical argument in the rest of his writing, but even ended with a call to bring back the gift to modern society, where the gift's darker facets are completely taken out of the picture and only its noble and solidary qualities remembered. Over the last decade, at any rate, many good and important efforts have aimed at producing better as well as more flexible typologies of the gift, distinguishing between types, dimensions, or components of gift giving, and usually approaching these not in terms of absolute distinction and dichotomies, but rather variable categories of analysis. I think I don't exactly follow the PTT, but it gives you a sense if you missed a line of what I said. But it also has led others to call for more deeply contextualized, historicized studies of the gift's multifarious emic perceptions, local constructions, and conjectural negotiations, to the point of retreating from conceptualizing either similarities or differences altogether. As I see it, however, we need not agree with this latter extreme stance. Giving up on a unified idea and theory of the gift does not necessarily mean to give up on all forms of conceptualization in that field. Rather than groping for the ultimate definition of what a gift is, we need search for conceptual tools that may help better explore, compare, interpret, and perhaps even explain gift processes in all their rich diversity and variability, without, however, losing sight of the gift's complexity and enigmatic power, precisely as underscored by M.A.U.S S, but also reaffirmed by many since. That is, its paradoxical capacity to combine with, if also challenge and transcend utilitarian considerations and obligatory constraints, and remaining charged with a distinctive set of tensions and contradictions. Strongly intimated in his essay on the gift already is the paradoxical and uncertain character of gift relations and processes, their contradictory combination of utilitarian and non-utilitarian motives, freedom and obligation, the element of risk or bet, the entailed indeterminacy and undeterminate stretching in time between giving and returning, the possibility of both reciprocity and non-reciprocity, solidarity and competition, and closely related to all these in sum, the lability, volatility, and unpredictability of a gift's implications. In sum, one can never be sure if a gift will be given or not, accepted or not, returned or not, why and how precisely, with what fluctuating and often internally contradictory interpretations and implications, ranging from benevolent, communicative, and peaceful to threatening, controlling, and violent. As the great historian of France, Nathalie Davis, put it aptly when writing of gifts in 16th century France, gifts can go wrong. Giving, in other words, tends to infuse a very tenor of social relations with a pulse of enhanced emotional intensity and a sense of risk or suspense for both donor and recipient, as well as any witnessing party, not unlike those famously attached ever since Clifford Geertz's famed article on the Balinese cockfight with the idea of deep play. I have devoted to that idea an entire article, and I won't be able to go deeper into it now. One of the more interesting questions becomes, from such a perspective, what becomes of this challenging and paradoxical pulsion as it comes to encounter with the many other dimensions and orientations at work in social life? To what extent and in what ways precisely does it deploy itself, shape diverse levels and spheres of social action, give rise to its very own patterns of action and distinctive ideation as well as institutional formations, or even vary in the extent to which it partakes of different forms and practices of giving? Moreover, and least explored to this day, how are we to understand the relation between diverse expressions of the gift coexisting within one same specific context? This is precisely where analyzing and comparing repertoires of philanthropic public giving becomes of special interest, be it in past or present contexts. To begin with, public giving helps us resist two major biases that have deeply shaped research on the gift. First, the long shadow of notions of gift exchange and reciprocity, under which gift processes have often been subsumed, as I noted before. Second, the tendency to a micro-sociological level of analysis, focusing on actors' motivations and gift processes in face-to-face direct interactions, or as they mainly affect private relationships. Instead, I submit, we need pay greater attention to non-reciprocity, or as I call it sometimes, unilaterality, asymmetry, and start explore the institutional and cultural aspects of giving at both meso and macro, rather than only micro levels of analysis. In line with M.A.U.S.'s emphasis on the complex and contradictory character of the later typological turn that I mentioned above, we need not expect the unilateral, non-reciprocal dimension of public giving to be exclusive and absolute, nor utterly devoid of any form of exchange or reciprocity. Making sense of public giving on the ground, as it were, means to make sense for many ways in which, in fact, reciprocity, some amount of it takes place, willy-nilly, intentionally or not. I skip all sorts of things that explain exactly what asymmetry and unilaterality is and how it mixes with exchange and reciprocity. Just the fact of accepting and receiving, besides, may itself be seen as a counter-gift, and as already implying some form of reciprocity, or better term, perhaps, mutuality. Making sense of asymmetric public giving also leads to replace an overriding focus on issues of reciprocity and exchange with an interest in the operation of gift processes in the symbolic expression, constitution, and negotiation of personal and collective identities in the public sphere. Symbolic processes of that sort, now often encapsulated in the idea of recognition, Honneth, Ricoeur, Cayenne, Lazary are the main authors in that direction, are far from being limited to reciprocal face-to-face gift interactions, such as more prevalent in archaic societies. Passé Marcel and M.A.U.S.S argument concerning ceremonial giving. Rather, the symbolic constitution and negotiation of identities need be seen as also extending, if in different ways, still to be better explored to the realm of asymmetric forms of public giving, be these past or contemporary. Moving now to the second bias, the micro versus meso or macro bias, public giving helps counterbalance what has long been a dominant tendency to a micro-sociological level of analysis, focusing on actors' motivations and gift processes in face-to-face direct interaction and or as they mainly affect private relationships. However contradictory, restless, and enigmatic giving might be, we need recall that giving and asymmetric giving in particular has been valorized and extensively institutionalized in many cultural and political traditions, past and present, thus also spawning not only fleeting face-to-face practices, but also ideas, practices, institutions that were and still are major features of the public sphere in many parts of the world, giving rise precisely to public giving. Rather than only one dominant ideal, normative practice, or institution, moreover, we can usually identify various forms of ideals and practices of public giving, coexisting or competing within diversified gift repertoires, such as charitable help to the needy, festive largesse, political tributes, donations to religious or cultural institutions, sponsoring of the arts and sciences, beautification of the public space in cities, be it by individuals or organized donating entities, foundations, non-profit organizations, even state. I think I have a definition of repertoires. So let me now expand a bit on this notion of repertoires of giving, which I did not just drop here incidentally. Building upon this idea of cultural repertoire, which has by now caught much ground in cultural analysis and sociological theory, repertoires of giving refer to the store of ideas and ideals, practices, institutions, priorities and dilemmas, foundational stories, ideological and cosmological theories of giving, coexisting and made available in a specific historical and cultural setting. Made to address the coexistence of diverse forms of gifting in one shared cultural setting and their related ideation as well as institutional dynamics, issues all hitherto most neglected in the literature, the idea of repertoire is especially useful in conveying the image of a structure that is both enabling and constraining, limiting but also flexible, and relatively stable yet never utterly static or closed. Relatedly, it connotes a measure of individual meaning and agency in mobilizing a specific configuration of cultural resources, while also stressing the public nature and public, relatively enduring availability of those cultural resources. We need, though, contemplate the gift as it is and has been historically deployed in often directed, in often indirect, mediated fashion, and in a way as to touch upon the public sphere and shape matters of public and collective concern. Enlarging our awareness of the gift's multiple facets and diversity, we need ask what happens to the gift in its more public configurations, and to what extent contemporary repertoires of public giving continue or differ from their previous expressions in earlier historical contexts. This also entails attending to religious forms and repertoires of giving, not only because of their distinctive interest as such, but also because they have been an influential historical variant of public giving, one also displaying enduring, even renewed vitality to this day. I think I will skip a little bit about the need to contextualize these gift repertoires of public giving, both institutionally and culturally, simply for the sake of saving time. What I do wish to emphasize, though, that when we need to conceptualize these repertoires of public giving, we need to pay attention not only to sacred text and explicit ideologies, but also reposition the gift as partaking of and shaped by broader ideational matrices and symbolic domains of meaning, cosmological, religious, moral, political, intellectual, aesthetic. In such perspective, the very way and extent to which giving is anchored in or even made central to discourses of collective and public concern may vary greatly. Let me touch now on a few historical precedents before I reach what is sexier and more interesting for us, what goes on in our own context. What is now addressed as elite philanthropy, mega donations of private wealth for public causes given by donors in positions of wealth and power, is far from being a new phenomenon. Neither is the part it can come to play in the public sphere. In that respect, it is crucial to learn from the contribution of a number of great historians, starting with Paul Venn's magisterial study of evergetism in the cities of late antiquity of 1976, but it has been translated into English in a very shortened version, cruelly shortened version in 1990. Historians have by now done much that helps us understand how giving for the public good, giving for the city, as it were, was not only a way for the wealthy and powerful to express their persona in the public sphere, but also a practice deeply infused with symbolic relational dynamics, intertwining with the expectations and reactions of an audience of citizens and plebs. A practice, moreover, profoundly hierarchical and unilateral in some ways, but also sustained by official rewards and expressions of public recognition in other ways. There have been more modern studies, of course, of that, like Jacques of 2016, that helps enrich the picture. But another example is Natalie Davis' study of the gift in 16th century France, which I mentioned before, and which I cannot go into any kind of detail, but which is important here because it amounts to a rare, outstanding attempt at mapping an entire repertoire, or as she calls it, a register or culture of giving in a specific historical and cultural context. Not only public giving, all forms of giving, and she manages to wrap it all in a slim book, which is really pathbreaking, extremely important. No less important, however, public giving is not only or necessarily secular, as I mentioned already before. From such a macro-institutional perspective, it is useful to recall Jonathan Perry's purification of the gifts hypothesis, which gave much weight to religious ideologies, but was also a theory of structural differentiation. In this important argument, the development of a new ideological stress on non-reciprocity and disinterestedness was facilitated by a specific kind of religious belief system, devaluating mundane interest and valorizing otherworldly transcendent orientations. This is maybe where we should link up to the Axel Age theory, but I won't start going into that. I'm not capable of going into that yet, at least. But it was also dependent upon a high level of social, mainly economic and political differentiation, which allowed the gift, in his opinion, to be unburdened, as it were, of many of the economic, social, and political functions which it had in archaic and differentiated settings. In this interpretation, however, we need note that Perry did not address processes of institutionalization of these new ideologies of pure, non-reciprocal giving and their possible orientation to and impact upon the public sphere. Not at all. He really did not touch at all upon these broader public implications. In contrast, I wish to stress that religious giving in the so-called great traditions came to operate as a major form of public giving, very much shaping, even constituting the public sphere, matters of public and collective concern, and giving rise to a whole arena of ideals, practices, and institutions. Clearly enough, various religious traditions also developed important variations in the kind of ideals, practices, and dilemmas they tend to facilitate, institutionalize, and privilege in their gift repertoires. In particular, as I have developed somewhere else, they could very much vary in the extent to which they developed and combined giving to the gods, giving to the poor, giving to religious elites or institutions, and giving for the good of the city or the community, or even giving to the dead. All forms of giving emerging and defining themselves to some extent by mutual relation, competition, and distinction among themselves. I have a whole section that explains that these issues have to be dealt not only in a synchronic fashion, but also in a diachronic fashion. We have historical studies by Peter Brown, for example, who picks up on Paul Venn, studies exactly the same phenomena, but shows actually how historically Christian religious charity developed and became part of the rise of a new kind of ecclesiastic kind of authority and status. The bishops, the position of bishops, was very much connected to that whole change. So it's also synchronic and it's also diachronic. In some and in more ways than I can depict here, arenas of religious giving in such context achieved a relatively high degree of organization and institutional autonomy, combined with a high level of symbolic articulation and ideological, largely religious and spiritual justification, and as such were a major force in the public sphere. Jumping now over many issues and centuries, let me now try to consider, if only too briefly, the very different case of philanthropic donations by the very wealthy in our own times. There are all sorts of issues. What is exactly public sphere that I had to actually skip here, okay? So, what I see emerging when we look at elite philanthropy today as public giving today is what I call a lopsided configuration, kind of imbalance. Elite philanthropy is quickly carving itself a place of growing importance in the public arena worldwide. Names of mega donors such as Gates, Buffett, Zuckerberg, George, Bezos, Bloomberg, and others are now common knowledge, and their latest traits, patterns, and policies of giving quickly aired and scrutinized by the media and business magazines, for example, Forbes, Fortune 500, Wealth, each with their own rankings and surveys, as well as specialized philanthropy literature and newsletters. Mega donors, however, are only one, if important and symptomatic element in a broader trend of expansion of philanthropy at large, manifests in the rising rates of individual giving in many countries and the efflorescence of old and new forms of giving. Sharply contributing to the increasing prominence and visibility of elite philanthropy is the advent of more assertive forms of philanthropy, as in high engagement, strategic, entrepreneurial, venture, catalytic, or simply new philanthropy. I have many names here of scholars that are well known: Franklin, Moody, Ostrander, Wagner, all now often gather under the umbrella of philanthrocapitalism. Again, a long list of researchers. Further contributing to philanthropy's high profile, we need note the part played by so-called philanthropy, philanthropic engagements of movie stars and other celebrities, rock star Bono, movie star Angelina Jolie, as well as highly publicized dramatic gestures of individual philanthropic commitment, such as the Giving Pledge launched by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett in 2010, joined by now by some 190 hyper-wealthy, pledging to donate half of their wealth before their death, or the Zuckerberg-Chan famous announcement in December of 2015 of their intention to donate 99% of their Facebook shares during their lives upon the birth of their daughter. Or even more recently, Jeff Bezos' unprecedented seeking of public input, as it were, on Twitter on how he should best allocate his wealth, followed a few months later by the announcement of a massive donation to a politically controversial cause, the Dream U.S. And just a couple of weeks ago, headlines announcing that he and his wife will keep working together on joint philanthropic projects even after their divorce. These are all making headlines of news in the main newspapers, media, and specialized, of course, magazines. Reaching for a meso level of analysis, moreover, there is increasing awareness of the development of philanthropy in general, and elite philanthropy in particular, into a complex and dynamic, distinct field of social action and organization of its own. The main scholar, for example, is Emily Bauman in that, and I wrote also about these things. Stating it very briefly, the picture emerging of the current state of philanthropy, be it from a national or international global perspective, is that of an increasingly distinct, highly visible and expanding field of action, now traversed by many different and competing tendencies, trends of increasing professionalization, rational management, and standardization, but also increasing diversification, marked by the growing role of localized frameworks and networks of collaborative giving, multiple styles and channels of giving, and variegated types of satellite professional actors and agencies offering services ranging from fundraising to various types of philanthropic advice, coaching, brokerage, wealth management and consulting, be these in a commercial or non-profit mode, and most significant for present purposes, often heavily slanted in one way or another to the higher echelons of mega donors. Again, I have a whole list of literature going this way, explaining what is happening now. While explanations for this growing tide of elite philanthropy may very well vary, it is usually understood as part and parcel of a whole set of sweeping changes in political economy at both national and international level. The weakening, these are all trends that everyone knows about. We constantly hear about it, we read about it. The weakening of welfare states, dominance of neoliberal ideologies, deregulating economic policies, the fast accumulation of new and staggering amounts of wealth in certain branches of the economy, the sharply increased concentration of wealth among the very upper strata. Of course, here we think of the famous Oxfam report just last year saying it's a kind of numbers that are very catchy, that 62 very wealthy now in the world actually own as much wealth and property as half of mankind. So that's the kind of images that are circulated around. And last but not least, the multiplication of non-profit organizations, itself often explained as largely a result of the same combination of macro changes competing for philanthropic contributions as a source of financial support. In this context, at any rate, the growing intervention of philanthropy raises many thorny and controversial issues, many far from new, concerning the moral implications and civic responsibilities of great concentration of wealth, not only for the very wealthy themselves or those benefiting from their philanthropic support, but also on a broader scale with regard to what may well amount to a lasting shift in patterns of civil society and modes of public governance in the context of 21st century, in the context of 21st century liberal democracies. There is a lot of talk of the refeudalization, for example, of society at large, of the public sphere in particular, or they call it sometimes the 1% economy and politics of today. It remains agreed, however, that the salient trend is one of dynamic growth and institutional expansion of elite philanthropy, accompanied by increasing prominence and visibility in the public sphere, features also becoming the object of intensified research by either philanthropy practitioners, policymakers, or academic scholars in various branches of the social sciences. Much less commented upon, in fact, still hardly systematically studied at all, perhaps because simply ignored or, on the other hand, taken for granted, above all by critics themselves, is the fact that this growing prominence also comes with a very serious downside, namely having to confront nowadays a mounting wave of attacks and criticism. And this is actually the phenomenon that I'm trying increasingly now to explore and focus upon. It's still all very tentative. I don't claim to really know it all, and it will take me at least a few more months, so I apologize. I am now at the initial stages, indeed, of a study aiming to map and analyze this surge, even violent surge of criticism. For now, I shall limit myself to give a sense of what it is about. And luckily for you, I have a PowerPoint at least. So FASICs, my books, articles, all types of mass media, think tanks reports, blogs, headlines of papers too, of the New York Times and and other of the Times or the Economies and so on and so forth. The most recent and prominent books, I show them because they are really very much talked about. This is what you have to read now if you want to know something about what is going on in that field. Winners Take All, the elite charade of changing the world, and you see the dates. It's really now. It's last year. Okay, M.A.U.S. is a terribly sharp attack on elite philanthropy. She calls it charismatic violence and the sanctification of the super rich. But also note that it is not me only who talks of giving. These books have very, very often, as part of their titles, as part of their analysis, the word giving, just giving, okay? No such thing as a free gift, and so on and so forth. And I give you much more here. The givers, the good rich and what they call, you can see the plutocrats, where rich people should have gone, Christine, instead of Davos, okay? Really, gospels of giving for the new Gilded Age. Are today's donor classes creating problems, solving problems, or creating them? Big citizens, these are more sociologists at the very end, but as you see, many of these attacks are not written by sociologists, but they include sociologists. And of course, there are also old criticism. I'm trying to compare between the older wave of criticism, actually, in which sociologists were more present, but often in a Marxist style and anti-capitalist style, and so on and so forth. We have to work at that. And I am trying to map, actually, this pool, repertoire of regimes of critiques. I am using here Boltanski's terms, regimes of critique and justification. I am going also to try to test his theories to see how much the critiques and justifications that I find fall neatly or not into their, actually it's Boltanski and Thévenot, into their typology. I very much suspect that not, and it would be good that it doesn't. But I am only at the very beginning, and I want to say at least that I see that there are critical themes that are micro, meso, macro, and I will show you how. There are critiques that are more limited, moderate, and there are some that are much more systemic. Some are just practical, some are much more ideological, moderate versus total, I said already. These are all overlapping distinctions, actually, maybe, I am not sure. So let me just give a list, a first tentative list, of how I arranged for myself. Meanwhile, it's really all tentative. I wouldn't let it be shown anywhere else, so please do not take any pictures because it's all tentative. Critical themes 1. What I mean by actually micro, it's critiques that really focus on these wealthy donors that I talked about before as individuals, okay? And they accuse them of self-interest, of being more interested in managing their own self, of managing their guilt. Philanthropy is a compensatory psychological mechanism, searching for prestige, conspicuous consumption, status display, search for power, thirst for social capital, closeness to other donors and elites, whimsical, based on donors' caprices, individual preferences, not reliable, paternalistic, hubris, megalomanic, and realistic, over-controlling, over-calculating, lacking compassion. You see, it is not a very generous picture that we get at the micro level. The meso level mainly focuses on relation between donors and recipient organizations. This can be all conscious or unconscious. Actually, the micro one too. I mean, it's not clear whether it's conscious or unconscious, which is, of course, a very major issue in sociological theory, in Marxist criticism. For example, is it conscious or not conscious ideology, dominant ideology? But there, the list includes the exaggerating impact of donors upon recipient organization, the fact that donors divert the organization from their mission, the fact that it's whimsical, how to rely on a long term. I am talking now of the organization point of view. You get money for a year and you don't know if it will last another year and what will happen. Whimsical again, these are things that I talked about before, but they get here a kind of meso, kind of volume. It is not the most efficient way of handling things. It's not transparent, of course. Christine is a big specialist of transparency. It is not transparent, it's not accountable, it's not regulated. It's bad for nonprofit organizations because it imports business norms and practices, standards of efficiency into it, measurement, tracking. It promotes commodification of everything around donations. Nonprofit action organizations itself, philanthropy itself, is undergoing marketization, commodification. The main name here is Eikenberry. She's a major scholar in that direction. And it turns recipients themselves into symbolic commodities. For example, I noted only one, Vinci 2013, talks of aid as sort of a shopping experience. Okay? And macro, and maybe this is really the sharpest and most aggressive, in fact. Again, it can be conscious or unconscious. Actually serving the interests of the upper classes, donations going to institutions and causes serving the upper classes, high culture, elite universities, art institutions rather than the poor, the more so given the distinction between charity and philanthropy. There's a long history of philanthropy. This is the actually a diachronic dimension that I was talking about, of modern philanthropy emerging to some extent, to a large extent, by contradistinction from what they perceived was characterizing more traditional patterns of a charity, and thereby also consolidating social inequality, serving the interests of capitalism at large. This is already more of a macro, neo-Marxist, Marxist kind of argument, preserving and reproducing social order and inequality, fending off buffer against criticism, blurring distinction between non-profit and for-profit. Again, now it's macro, it's not only meso. Undermining democracy, of course, and due political power. It allows private actors to impinge upon the public agenda. lack of transparency again on the macro level, lack of accountability on the macro anti-democratic level, elitistic and so on. Undermining the welfare state, and this is now the most talked about issue, of course, if some people are following not only Trump's policies and what is happening in America, although it's the sharpest there, but it's also happening in France. I follow what is happening in France quite closely, and there too, there is now both a new giving pledge, actually a French giving pledge, so you see there is and it expands, and philanthropy is on the rise. And yet also there is a new study by economists that echoes actually Piketty and Zuckman from Stanford and so on, and that claims that the tax exemption policies of France, that has been incredibly generous. France is actually giving a tax exemption of 75%, which is more than anywhere else, but it doesn't succeed. They don't succeed to have enough donors. So you see the ambivalence to criticize actually the phenomenon of tax exemptions and also tax evasion, of course, as diminishing the resources of the state, and yet to want to encourage giving, even in France. Not efficient, wasteful, partaking in the effect of other influence elites, which is the concept of Wedel from 2017, in evading public accountability, considered the hallmark of democratic societies. Often, again, it's not always conscious, there are also unintended paradoxical effects. Nina Eliasov, who is a sociologist, a cultural sociologist, actually talks a lot about that. There is a lot of talk about empowerment, but there is no actually less criticism showing that actually what she claims is that in fact it breeds or reinforces mistrust and resentments against all elites and the public domain at large. Okay? So this is what I'm doing, and I am asking myself within this whole map of critiques, what does it tell us about the gift? Where is, very, very often, if someone is very critical, it means that you have some kind of normative reference, ideal norm that you compare something with. And this is what I'm going to try to see. Does it imply actually still the survival of any reference to an ideal pure gift? And now moving to the justifications on the positive side, we should not, of course, limit ourselves to only critiques. We have to see what are the justifications. But in fact, I must admit that the critical voices are much stronger and much more present on the public scene today than voices that justify or promote public giving. These are actually the classic justifications. There is quite a from Carnegie to Peyton, passing through various names. Current justification, you have Bishop and Green, Singer, Suskis. I think I must do a value jar. I think he's the best scholar in the field of philanthropy right now, both historically and in terms of being balanced. I mean, he's really someone I listen to very much and I read carefully. But look how philanthropy matters, how the wealthy give, and what it means for our economic well-being. And he says, yes, it's terribly important. Okay? Now, list of justifications, I won't tire you. I am trying also to list them into micro, meso, macro, and seeing how I succeed to match the list of justifications that are for philanthropy and those that are against philanthropy. And I will just finish now. I don't know how much time I spent on that, and if I still have the time or not. 5 minutes, good. That's not bad. Okay, but I am trying to do empirical research. I thought actually I had a PowerPoint on it in order to find not only the critiques, which are much more obvious and present. It's not difficult to find them. How can I find the positive justifications? And for that, at least for now, I started to explore two different avenues. One is the Giving Pledge, doing an analysis of all the letters in the Giving Pledge. It is interesting that you don't have only the Giving Pledge, but you have even an entire site devoted only to watching the Giving Pledge. So here you have this issue of the audience, okay, that if I still have the time, I will talk about it a little bit. And second, I am writing about the expansion of what I call this arena of philanthropy promoting organizations. There is a huge number of philanthropy promoting and philanthropy mediating organizations worldwide. Of course, the concentration is heavier in the United States, but it's not only the United States, and I am trying to do an analysis of what kind of organizations. I've reached a list of 300 organizations, but of course I will focus only on some of them that are paradigmatic of certain tendencies of a certain types, and try to study their internet sites and maybe conduct selected interviews and see actually how do these promoting organizations, how do they conceive of philanthropy and of justifying philanthropy. So just a minute to conclude in a more elegant way, maybe. The point is indeed that there is still no systematic comprehensive analysis of this very state of affairs, of the ambiguous contradictory status of mega philanthropy in general, and of the huge upsurge of criticism and hostility to it in particular as a cultural trend and phenomenon worth attention as such. My argument, in a nutshell, is that while mega public giving is increasingly prominent and in the public eye, it seems to also lack the more solid institutional props and ideological source of legitimacy, be these religious or not, it was able to secure in some major pre-modern settings. But if this is the case, it is also to a large extent because the public sphere itself, or what can count as such, is undergoing sweeping change. This cannot but enhance, and here I want to look at it, just finish with the point of view of the donors and their interaction with an audience. Well, actually, we're not sure who is the audience. This is why I had a PowerPoint at some point. Who is the audience? Where is the audience? This whole situation cannot but enhance the sense of risk and intensity, of moral import and symbolic drama for those mega donors willing to enter the scene, join in the public display of wealth given away, thereby exposing themselves to the uncertain ebb and flow of respect and recognition, or on the contrary, hostility and contempt, perhaps even worse, cool indifference of the public at large. Now, what happens about what is the audience, I will summarize what I mean actually, is that a lot of what is happening in the field of philanthropy is discrete. I am using actually Christine's concept, is not publicly displayed. It's very easy to look at Bezos and all that, your Gates and public statements and all that. But a lot of it is precisely happening in the field mediated by so many new philanthropic professions, advisors, wealth managers, with often legal and illegal aspects, half displaying, half keeping things secret. Now, this is terribly important now, but again, it's not a new dilemma in all the great traditions, and this will be my last sentence, sincerely now. You have this ideal of secret giving, of hiding, or not displaying that you give. But already in the very early Christian text, you have something, I don't remember, it is in Matthew, I have it cited somewhere, but I won't waste time now, saying, but you should let others know, because it might encourage them to give more. And to finish on a funny thing that I noticed only this morning, because I follow the Chronicle of Philanthropy and these magazines and newsletters and the field of philanthropy. There's someone who gave a huge amount of money now to research on extreme selfishness. That's it.